CSM should have between what I'm hearing, at least in in the Chicago space, CSM should have between 1 million and 1.5 million book of business. So you have executives that hear that and want to say, okay, great, how many customers is that? And whether it's in an interview cycle or in discussing it internally in a job, I always start with, that's the wrong question to ask. And I try to get it back to, let's just accept that we're going to focus our CSMs on our enterprise customers first, because they're the ones, a 1% uplift from a $10 million company. I'm not great at math, but is better than a 1% uplift from, a $1,000 company. So what's the engagement model? What does that require per CSM a week to do it well in terms of hours? Then you leave 20% out for PTO and emergencies and escalations and stuff like that. And you go, great. For sake of argument, it's going to take it's going to take 2 hours a day to manage this customer. So you take out 20%. That's roughly, call it an hour and a half. So you can manage 3 customers in that day. So that would be about 15 customers. That's always the way that I've approached it. And I've had pretty good success in reframing the conversation that way.
Effie, I'm going to call on you next. I don't see you yet, but I'm going to find you while you're talking.
I'm right here. Thanks, Jay.
There you are.
It's like the Brady Bunch up here. So thanks, Jay. So a few words about why I think it's common to actually allocate ARR amounts to CSMs, and it's incorrect. The main reason that we do it is because it's an easy way to get a return on the investment of a CSM, right? A CSM gets a certain salary, you allocate a certain ARR amount, and then you know that it's working or not. But in reality, it's not really a practical way. And the way that I've allocated within my organization is a little different. We allocate it more based on needs. So while we do segment our customers into bronze, silver, gold, and obviously the bronze get a very hands-off approach, the silvers and the gold get a little bit more love from our CSMs, but the amount that each one has depends on what cycle they're in. So if they're onboarding, and as we know, onboarding is probably one of the most important cycles within customer success, they'll get fewer customers. And then those really high ARR customers who've been with us for such a long time, those customers may not show up to QBRs because they know them so well. They've been with us for 5 years already. They just need a different approach and a different amount of nurturing than someone who's being onboarded. So it doesn't make sense to get, let's say, 3 high ARR customers who we know that are advocates and work with us, and they just don't need the same amount of attention. So it tends to shift based on need. I'm wondering if anyone else out there sees that as well.
Yeah, this is Sharmila. I completely agree, coming from a senior CSM role for about 7 years. We always kind of associate things with that dollar value, but it's understanding, how many users does that CSM have to touch? You could have a client that is buying a product and the product is just expensive, but there's only maybe 4 or 5 users. That's easy to manage. But if you've got an enterprise-wide account that's 1,500 users, how is that CSM going to make sure that they touch those 1,500 and making sure there's adoption, especially on the onboarding process? So I think it is very important to kind of shift away from the mindset of looking at dollars and looking at what is needed. And I think the approach of the bronze, silver, gold, platinum, however you want to organize it within your organization, is critical. So I agree with you in that.
Yeah, that's great. There's a packaging element, and then there's a customer tiering element from what I'm hearing. So Chris Mitchell, I'm going to let you get in here.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Yeah, no, totally agree. Very much down to the amount of effort you need to put in particular customers. And a lot of that goes down to also the maturity of your customer success organization, because you've got to start from somewhere. So you've got to start looking at what works to begin with. And as I grow the organization, how do I refine the model moving forwards? And being based in the UK, one of the things I sort of learned early on as well, you've got to be very careful when you're working for a US headquartered organization, because obviously it tends then to have a more mature organization in the US. They tend to understand effort levels and everything else. They create a model that tends to work for allocation or loading of accounts to CSM, and then try to apply that regionally to APAC and to Europe as well. And that doesn't work. So it's really important that you understand the regional differences as well. Understand how mature your region is compared to the US headquartered region, if that's the case, and then apply some kind of logic to work out how you need to differ that across the different regions. So I think there are multiple elements at play. You know, you've got to look at making sure that you know, your CSM is cost justified, because, you know, we never want CS to be seen as a cost model. We've then got to look at effort that's involved. We've then got to look at cultural differences, language differences, differences in whether we travel to on-site more frequently or not, and so on. So there are so many different elements to take into it, and there's no right or wrong answer here. It's I think experience shows, and you refine the model as you go.
I do have a quick follow-up question, Chris, if you don't mind. You sort of implied this, but do customers in EMEA and customers in Europe expect a different level of engagement or on-site presence or whatever? And then kind of second thing is, how does that factor into your staffing and all that?
Yeah, no, sure, Jim. It's a good question. And it's very easy to fall back on that as an excuse and say, oh, we're totally different here and things have got to be different. But there are differences. So yes, generally, if you think back to the US model going back over time, the US is much more used to doing business on the phone. In Europe, people are much more used to doing business face to face. Let's put COVID to one side for a second, you know. So pre-COVID, yes, there was a much more of an expectancy to hold, particularly EBR type meetings face to face and everything else, where I saw a lot more of that in the US happening online through Zoom or WebEx or whatever. So there is that time element you've got to figure into it as well, and also it's more complicated in the regions because of the language differences too. So quite often you're having to cope with multi-language customer bases as well, especially in enterprise. So you've got to look at what are the different aspects that add to the complexity of the engagement model.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's also really important, I think you touched base on that, is the cultural and diversity of your clients. So I think it's also very important to ensure that the CSM who has those global enterprise accounts also get some training on diversity, cultural, business rules and norms within those different areas of the world, because Asia does work differently than the US. You know, Europe works differently than the US. So it's important to see those factors, how they work, but then as a business side, I think it's very important for business continuity is to try and create a process that works for everybody. And I think that's sometimes the struggle. But I think a lot of things, especially in the time that we're living in right now, I think that might be a little bit easier to take a look at and see how you can streamline the processes so it works for everyone, but then have your different nuances depending on the customer and where they're located.
And take that one stage further, Sharmila, as well, and be careful not to typecast the whole of a region, because within APAC, countries are culturally different to countries and so on. So it's not that there's an APAC culture or an EMEA culture or anything else. There are local cultures and diversity issues that you have to think about within region. So please don't think region to region is different. Culture to culture is different.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And the town can be different.
Yeah. Sorry, Anika here, also from London, adding to what Chris just said. I have team located across EMEA and APAC, and I think my EMEA team, another way we segment when it comes to customer segmentation is language. particularly French speaking, as well as Spanish speaking and German speaking. Those countries tend to work exclusively with the language as well. But we also segment in those regions on growth potential of the customer. So a lot of our strategic CSMs work on the potential of an account, not necessarily the ARR. So we look at the white space of an account and see the potential that that account can grow into. So that's kind of just adding on to the conversation here about how we kind of look at what type of portfolio each CSM looks at. We definitely, for EMEA, look at language barriers as well as the potential to grow, because some regions as well as some countries have smaller accounts that aren't going to actually grow and don't need a strategic CSM, but some accounts do have a huge potential and would need a strategic CSM.
So everybody, I'm guessing, you might have one of these like pyramid kind of diagrams with your customer segmentation, and maybe you have different tiers within that. And then you have a ratio that says X number of customers to one CSM. I'm curious if anybody uses a capacity modeling approach. Like, do you use a spreadsheet? Do you like, what kind of inputs are you actually modeling out the number of hours that will take to do those activities you want them to do? Marco, Innocenti from Zoom, I'm gonna call you out if you don't mind. Do you guys, how do you think about this capacity modeling? I'm sure it's a big challenge for you guys right now. How do you think about that at Zoom?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much out the window right now. We just assign everything that's coming into and hope to cover as much as we can. We don't bucket it. So yes, we have the pyramid based on tiers and segmentation, but we don't look at, the annual revenue of an account or accounts or book of business to assign to CSMs. We do it by number of accounts. What we expect a CSM to be able to manage effectively within each of those tiers. So the closer to the tip you get, it should be less of a ratio is how we've approached it. And I forgot who was mentioning kind of the EMEA and APAC models. Similarly, like those are adjusted for country and or region as well, because you certainly have to take those considerations in place. We also blend it pretty heavily at the same time. So even though we try to have some of those, it's a hard and fast rule in terms of a model and headcount planning, I would say. But when it comes to the practical application of who you need to support your accounts, there's certainly much more of a gray area.
Yeah. Do you find, Marco, that then tends actually to quite a lot of debate around headcount when you've done your modeling for headcount based on that, but then, as you say, the practicality is very different, then all of a sudden you find a shortfall between the two?
Yeah, well, it comes from that, and then as well as, we build a model based on what our expectations are, and then, when you're doing planning with FP&A, they say, well, this is the budget you have to work with. And so, there's your ideal scenario of what you want to put together, and then there's the reality of what you can afford as a business.
Yeah, and I used to keep a sort of spreadsheet that was based on actual budget and what was meant to be the plan and what was reality, and tried to get the two as close together, but rarely worked.
Yeah.
The thing is, what everybody's sort of really saying is that, yeah, it's custom and it's different in each individual situation, but it's fundamentally a question of math, right? In the sense that, I can't tell you the amount of conversations I've had over the years with CEOs who make, as Jay said in his first point, broad sweeping statements such as, yeah, they should have a book of business of 3.2 million. Well, then you break that down and you say, well, you've got, in order to give them a book of 3.2 million, you need 300 customers. In an average working week, you have 40 hours, you have 160 hours in a month. If your expectation is that, hey, we're going to have an hour with each customer, and you've got 320 customers, then that's clearly not going to fit into a month. You can't make that happen. And so I think for a lot of this, it's, what are your resources? What is your budget? What does that look like? What level of service do you have? And then it's like, well, from a math standpoint, can I make that work? And I think that goes back to the spreadsheets and the other piece. But even if you can, it's kind of like, what's the trade-off? What's most important to you? Is it meeting the headcount goals? Is it meeting the touch points? Is it a different level for your top customers? And then trying to put that equation together. And we find different, just trying to weight that, what's most important here. Because ultimately, one of the things we did was we said, look, we cannot make this work with the headcount and budget that we have. Therefore, I think the example was gold, silver, bronze. Therefore, my bronze customers, they're just going to get a self-service experience, because the benefit in the silver and gold far outweighs the negatives in that third tier.
Chris, I love that point that you made about the math. One of the challenges that I'm facing, we're a startup. We've been around a few years, but we're still a startup. And we fortunately have reached the point sometimes that the amount of CSMs, the capacity that a CSM has, is basically challenged by the amount of accounts that they get. And I'm constantly struggling with the numbers of when to justify onboarding another team member. I'm curious if you, like, again, according to the math, at what point how do you justify to management bringing in another account with your accounts?
I mean, for us, it's planned out, I guess, so if you're going beyond that, like if it's a model that everyone's agreed to and we see an influx like we are right now, well, FP&A and everyone's like, okay, well, to keep those ratios as stable as we can, here's how we're going to give you more headcount. So if you don't have those numbers established and agreed to by the business ahead of time, it's going to be much harder, I think, to do that justification
on the base of ARR or MRR or whatever it is?
Whichever model has been agreed to by the business, I think. So whichever one you have in place, ours, again, it's account total. So we've kind of always judged it based on that. So if that was your original planning model for capacity to be able to hire to, if you're seeing more come in than you have, well, that's headcount justification. If not, if you're not hitting those thresholds and you want to go back to them and say, I think my thresholds were incorrect and I need to hire more, you're gonna have to build a stronger case around that.
Right.
Yeah, we tend to look at it
around
from
that. Sorry, just a quick one to answer that one, Effie, as well. Last time I saw unexpected growth really quickly, I decided to push the envelope a little bit and hired a couple of contractors to act in a CSM capacity because they were seen as a different kind of resource. And then once I did that, solve the growth problem that had occurred quickly, I then started to factor that back into the headcount modeling and reorganize the modeling. So there are sometimes shortcuts around things that are forecast and not planned.
I think somebody else was trying to get in there, but David, I'm going to let you go. I know you've been trying to get a word in as well. David Badea.
Well, I just didn't want to jump in. Sorry. So first, I love Chris, the comment about math, as Effie said. That's the phrase I use internally all the time of just do the math. You don't have enough time in the day to do the work you say you're doing. When people are talking about the scale, right? So when people say bronze, silver, gold, and all that, in my mind, I actually look at it differently. I look at it as what's the minimum tier of coverage you provide to every customer? What are you doing for customers that you think are risks? And what are you doing for customers that you think are growth opportunities? And that's the way I kind of look at the world, which is totally different than, gosh, that's such a great logo. I love it. That could be a horrible customer or a good customer. It's hard to say. The other thing is that, and this is a comment I made on the side, and I could go on for 2 hours about this, but I believe strongly that CSMs, as part of the built-in cost of ownership, are a ramp, using the same pyramid we were just talking about. But, and this is the key thing, if your customers want more time from you, if you have customers saying, I wish I could have more time from your CSM, I'm a strong believer in providing an escape hatch, an option for them to buy more time and attention. And because especially at the enterprise level, they want that. They know what they want and they're willing to pay for it, usually. And so you say, look, we can provide this much coverage. That's what we think is optimal. But if you want more, here's the pricing schedule. And you can call it professional services if you want.
Yeah.
But it's a different point of view. In my mind, it's actually not professional services. And Jay, you and I have talked about this. I have my analogy, which, the gym analogy for SaaS companies. And, professional services are physical therapists. They work on specific problems. CSMs and CSAs, which is the team I built at DocuSign, we're personal trainers. every week we do something different. This week we're working on your endurance. Next week we're working on your arms. Next week we're working on your diet. Next week we're working on something else. It just changes over and over again. What we do is different, but the goal is always the same, which is at the end of the contract, it's a no-brainer renewal. And in fact, they're going to want more of us. And so that's how I look at the world, which is a little different than some of the things I've been hearing, which is cool. It's good. Variety is the spice of life. So I don't know if that added value for everybody.
That analogy, I had forgotten it, but that just added a ton of value for me personally. So I'll speak for myself.
Yeah.
Hey,
I have a great diagram of how to show that.
Well, share it on the community. Hey, Courtney, I wanted to call on you. I've seen your head nodding a lot here. What kind of challenges have you seen recently with this?
Yeah, well, so, you know, we kind of did it right at our company, right? We had CS really before we had, you know, what some would justify as a need for CS. And we have a very high friction product. And really, over the years, CS has sustained that. And so we're getting, as we've brought new C-suite leadership in, we come from a very heavy government background. And so as we're, you know, scaling to that next phase, we brought in some real commercial talent at that C-suite level, who have worked with CS before. But they come to our company and they say, this is not like CS I've ever seen before, right? Where we have the domain expertise. We're really very high touch because all of our customers are enterprise. And really, as we've kind of worked out the kinks in the process, we've had to have CS really cover that gap. But now that we're getting to a place where the product is at a more stable state, you know, and with all of the COVID situation, there's a look at, okay, let's look at the organization as a whole across the company, and really kind of clarify those roles and really set some of those models needed for headcount. And so what I've seen as of late, I've seen some stuff taken out of the dishwasher, dusted off, and presented as a standard, which is that 2 million AAR for all the CSMs. But it just doesn't fit right now. And so what I'm struggling with is how to, you know, communicate that it's not one size fits all. You know, we have some customers that may be on the lower end of AA, you know, I always mix that up. So it's
ARR,
annual recurring revenue. I always want to throw an extra A in, but I'm bad with acronyms, and that came from the military, so that's horrible.
Awesome annual recurring revenue.
But you know, with that, it's, you know, we have customers that are out there that are on the lower end, but they're really lighthouse customers, and they're going to be strategic for growth and expansion. So it's just, especially this week, it's timely. I'm trying to communicate that effectively to the C-suite about how, you know, it's not one size fits all, and there are different variables to take into consideration, you know, when we, you know, set what the head count is and what we're projecting as sales meets their quota and bring those customers in. So this has been wonderful. I'm definitely taking a lot of notes from the group. So, but that's my current challenge.
Yeah, makes sense. Hey, Jeremy, I know you had a comment as to like the why about all this, and that might tie in with Courtney's point there about how to sort of justify a variable way of looking at this.
Yeah, so it kind of came off of what David was sharing about a different perspective. I think alignment, as we think about it from a CS perspective, needs to be the why of why the customer is buying from us needs to be at the center of the alignment, because no two customers are the same. And on top of that, you don't want to necessarily align a CSM who may be working with one or two really big, complex customers. They may not be spending a lot, but may have really complex, very specific needs that require a lot of time, either from a CSM, product manager, whatever it is, versus a customer who's just buying to check a box. And they say, hey, I was told I need to go buy this. I have to have it. We want to, as a company, provide value to that customer, but they're not strategically looking at whatever company you work for they're not looking to you to be that trusted advisor. They're looking to check a box at that point in time. And there may be time where that shifts and we are able to shift the conversation from checking a box to something more strategic. But looking at and making sure that as you're assigning accounts to CSMs, that the why is understood, because the why is going to directly drive the capacity to how many accounts that person is going to be able to manage, whether it's 2 accounts because of complexity versus 50 accounts because they're lower touch, and that sort of thing. So that was really just what I wanted to add to the conversation.
That makes perfect sense. So I think about this a little bit in terms of jobs to be done, if you've sort of thought of that framework, but there are commercial things, there are business domain subject matter things that we need to do. There are technical things and there are relationship things that we need to do with our customers. And so the question is, like, what increments do those come in and how much of that do we need for each different type of account? So yeah, go ahead, David. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah, you know, you have to go back to your comp plan and look at your comp plan, right? Comp drives behavior, and if you're holding your CSM responsible for relationship type of work, and then you pile on a bunch of upsell, cross-sell stuff, and you don't give them a target for that, and you don't give them enough time to work on that, something's going to suffer, and morale is certainly going to suffer, as well as the customer relationship. So whatever you do, you have to align how you allocate customers to CSMs with what you're measuring them on and what you're comping them on.
Absolutely, man. We should probably have a whole breakout on comp at some point. That would be an exciting conversation for sure. Anybody?
Maybe almost too controversial.
Andreas, we're having a hard time hearing you. You sound like a robot, and I know that's not how you sound in real life. So.
Actually, that's my real voice. I said comp plan may be almost too controversial. Definitely, that should be our next session. So
we can't hear you, man. We're gonna have to reconnect. Sorry, buddy. Let's see. Who haven't we heard from yet? Is anybody trying to get in that wants to say a word? Go ahead. Did somebody jump in there?
I mean, I can jump in, but I've said a word. So by all means, if anybody wants me to stop, just let me stop. No problem. I think also on the onboarding process, I heard, just capacity level. When we're talking about onboarding, I think it's very important to look at your process. What is the goal? What are the ROIs? What are the metrics that you're going to measure, especially with your ROI? Because that is going to build a foundation for the next step in that retention motion. So really looking at that process and seeing what things you can streamline, what things can be automatically done. If you're using a CRM tool, what tools are in place in that CRM tool to then do things automatically so your CSM is not bogged down in doing these tasks that can be done automatically. And I think that's very helpful in streamlining that process, and it'll also increase employee happiness because now they're not bogged down with these minutia of things that they have to do on a daily, weekly basis because they've automated it. And with that said, it's also looking at reporting. So coming from a data analytics perspective, it's important to provide the proper data for all of CSM, but for onboarding, I think it's really important. So then that data can then be used to create a good process and a good streamlined flow on continuing to touch customers and build that good foundation from the get-go.
Yep, absolutely. And, I know there are a lot of companies probably skews more to the enterprise side that have a separate onboarding team that also has to be factored in, or an implementation team. Hey, Anna, Allie, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. How are you guys thinking about this at Avid?
Yeah, there's so many changes happening at Avid right now related to the customer success team that I'm just like nodding my head a lot and taking a lot of notes. But we actually have had just recently had a major change in our CS function, and so the conversations around seeing customer success as kind of a cost center as opposed to a revenue driver is a major topic of conversation within our business, and it's up until this point been a challenge. We actually were forced to lose some of the teammates on our CS team. So we're having to do kind of a whole big restructure of account allocation, of how we automate a lot of the touch points that previously weren't automated. We're building out a health score. So there's like a ton of stuff. And I've only been over the customer success department for 4 months. So a lot of it is new for me too. So a lot of this is hitting home. But we've made a lot of progress in the last 2 months too. And it's very much in line with what a lot of people are raising and bringing up. We're actually switching to kind of a merged model with our customers, where we're doing initial allocation based on ARR in terms of who gets a dedicated CSM versus who doesn't. But then within those accounts that are getting a dedicated CSM, trying to segment those based on kind of need of engagement. So kind of doing a dual combination of initial assignment, do you get a CSM or not? And then what's the level of engagement within that? So kind of, we're having to kind of take both into consideration. And we're working on implementing that right now. So a lot happening.
Hey, Jen, just because I'm Anna's partner in crime, I wanted to just add something, because Anna's mentioned she's new to the role. So she's basically cleaning up my leadership mess. I'm just going to call it what it is. So what Effie, a lot of what you were saying, I kind of wanted to just sit and talk to you about all the mistakes that I've made over the last 2 years, so that you don't make the same mistakes. I've been at a startup that's no longer a startup for 18 years. So the CS function was introduced by one of my leaders. So I also have an onboarding team and a support team. So I took my eye off the team, quite frankly. It was before we were really great with KPIs and metrics. And it really was, for me as a relationship leader, about relationship. We already have a strategic account team that is responsible for quotas. And so I let the team get too big. I had a very supportive leader. And once that leader was removed, the focus on really what should have been my focus from the beginning, and quite frankly, how I was raised at a startup, to be really lean and to make decisions based on numbers and processes, and then build the team from there. Instead, I turn around and I have a 28-person CS team for roughly, really, we say we have 6,000 customers, but really the number we're servicing is quite a bit smaller than that. So I let the team get too big. We didn't have good metrics. We weren't able to show our true values. So we spent a lot of time defending ourselves last year, and basically a glorified escalation team. So all the conversations are really resonating with me about getting your metrics in line. I'm a firm believer that the differentiation in our CS team is the strong consulting, product knowledge, support of renewals and retention, versus them carrying a sales quota. But I just made a ton of mistakes. And I absolutely have Anna's an amazing leader already. She's started in our onboarding team. She has deep product knowledge. So I'm so glad that you guys are all here. I just wish I had you 2 years ago, because I really, quite frankly, FCS up at our company.
No.
And we're rebounding. So I love commentary, and I know I have a great leader, but I would encourage you all to have really great metrics and to be able to defend the value through all the things that you're already talking about. So a lot of what you said has really resonated with me.
Yeah, I don't think anybody gets this right out of the gates. And anybody, even if they're in sales or HR or marketing, it doesn't matter. Like, people are, especially in high growth companies, right? You should all give yourselves a little bit of breathing room, because not only do you have to deal with, building an organization, but you also have to do it while you're growing extremely quickly. And that is a whole new dimension that a lot of very well-established industries don't understand, because if you're growing at 50 or 100% a year, it changes the game immensely. What worked 2 months ago doesn't work anymore. Hey, Ben Bunting, what are you thinking over there, man?
Taking a lot in. I guess going back to the very first question about ARR, and we had pretty specific guidance from, the top down of saying you have X amount of ARR per client or per CSM in terms of headcount. And then from there, we can break it out however we want. But it makes it very easy to say, okay, well, we feel like it's a decent number. And so when it comes to growing the team, and when we bring in, when sales sells a lot more, then we can hire as fast as we need to, because we know exactly how much ARR is required by each CSM. And that comes down from the top. I think a few people have said that, like, we need to be profitable. And so they know the cost of the role compared to the margin and the product, and they have all that equated out, equaled out. And so then it's our job to take that number. So let's say it's 800,000 per client. We're trying to get that to 1.5 million as an internal goal, just because we know, like, with the hundreds of clients, once we get to thousands, it's just not that as sustainable. We have a lot of large enterprise clients, and so it's everything's high touch, and so it's just not that sustainable. So we're trying to take it from let's say it's 800,000 per to 1.5 million, and that's not a perfect number, but we want them to be able to manage more. And so having the leadership give us a reasonable number that we can work with just changes everything in terms of, okay, now it's our job to improve it. And so we do a lot of tracking of saying, okay, here's exactly what they should be doing. And we're trying to learn how much time it takes each CSM to do those types of roles, because we just don't know exactly. And so and then try to find out where. But we have some CSMs that do, 800, and some that do 1.5 million. Just depends on their, how long they've been around and their skill level. So, but having a set number from leadership is really, it's a starting place. So
yeah, it removes some friction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Has anybody found that, and by the way, we've got about 5 more minutes, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about onboarding next week, but has anybody found that you've had to maybe start by beefing up your support team before you really start making a case for, creating more customer success manager heads?
Well, not just the support team. I found, and I hope folks can hear me now,
Gotcha.
that it could be support, it could be onboarding. In one case, it was actually the training and documentation that had sapped up a lot of resources, or the lack thereof. And so instead of just growing the team and coming back and saying, like, well, with our ratio number, if we're growing by 20%, I need 20% more CSMs, it's like, we can either hire 20% more CSMs, or we can fix these other things that I believe are causing some inefficiencies in our process. So let's rather tackle that as well. And having some data behind it then help me put the case together for the executives to see what is the better approach, instead of just cookie cutter replicating the same mistakes from the past. So
I think that's a great comment. This is Clark. Another thing you need to keep in mind is how long it takes to ramp up a new CSM. If you have a really complex product or a technical product, and it's 6 months before they're fully up and running, then you need to take that into account in your capacity planning.
Yeah, agreed, Clark. And it's important to look at the ramp of the growth, not just a static growth figure. Is the growth incrementing quarter over quarter? In which case, don't look at the next quarter's growth forecast. Look at the one beyond that, because, like you say, you've got to take that ramp up time into account.
I will say that, add on to that, one of the things that we've done at my company, and hey, this is Joe, by the way, first time speaking here. Very similar to Heather, my previous company launching a CS department messed up a lot, right? And one of the things was the difference between support and customer success. So at this company, what we did is we launched customer support first to really just handle the reactive stuff to create that base. From there, we then moved into a high-touch customer success model. And now what we're doing, since we have that as a well-oiled machine, we're essentially pulling team members from the customer support team to act as customer success associates to start now engaging with our low-touch customer success segment. So now we're kind of looking at it as like proactive customer support, like 2.0. And that's been really great because that allowed us to have like a career path as well, from support into customer success.
Yep.
I love what you just shared there, Joseph, because I think that's where we're starting off and building towards. We have several markets across the states. We do contracts with health plans and state entities when possible. So I am the client services manager for the state of Connecticut, and all the Medicaid healthcare facilities in the state of Connecticut, which is over 1,000. And so, yeah, we're already starting to ramp up where I was, showing the value of what the CSM model is. Can be hard when you're in such a early stage, and there's so much. You have to build a CRM system. You have to do all this other stuff. So we are starting with agents as well that are being pulled from our contact center, our call center agents, and they're being trained into some quasi, customer success associate role. And from there, we're starting to build models for growth into a customer success supervisor, customer success managers, senior managers, and so on. And there has been a lot of hope and acknowledgement added to the work we're doing. But I absolutely agree that sometimes you have to start with at least getting agents that can help do a lot of the dirty work for you, and it allows you to do more of the relationship building and value adding with your customers.
I think also it really depends on the size of your organization. If you're a startup, that small team might be doing both. And I think what's really important is looking at why customer service is being called and what are those issues that customers are having, because then you can tie that with the CSMs so they can make sure that they're being trained if it's user issues or user error. Or just a training error. So it definitely works hand in hand, but I think it also depends on the size of the company. I mean, the company I work for is over 30,000 people. I've been, a CSM, for 7 years, but 7 years ago we just didn't call it CSM. Now it's evolving, right? It's evolving, but we've always had customer support. But as a CSM, it was always looking at customer support and saying, why do customers keep calling them? What do I need to do to touch base so they can stop calling them or figure out a process or see what's technically or what the issues are? So I think for where do you start with? I think it really depends on the size of the organization and making sure that they both work hand in hand.
Yep, absolutely. We're gonna get pulled back into the main conference here. I encourage you just to hang on for a few more minutes if you can. We had a lot of people drop off with the transition last time, which I know is tricky, but just to summarize a couple things that I heard, and by the way, be thinking about your one takeaway and your one action, like what are you going to do differently next week? But get agreement from the top down, whether it's logical or not, at least have a starting point of an agreement. I like what you said about that, Ben, that you can work from, and then you can work from there to adjust that agreement. Define the level of touch needed at each segment, right? And also the big thing I picked up there was by region. That's a big factor, especially if you're a global organization with different countries represented in your customer base. And then think about how stage is a factor, onboarding versus non. We'll go into onboarding next week. And then I like this idea of starting with support that came up as well. And getting that right, we often call it the dial tone. Like you pick up the phone and the dial tone's on, if you remember what that sounds like. But getting that right is a good first step. Okay, here we go. We're getting ready to return to the main screen, so we'll see you guys there.